Buongiorno tutti, and welcome to Radio Voice Italia's Christopher Columbus University, where we teach you the truth about the greatest hero of the 15th and 16th centuries, Christopher Columbus. Today, lesson 3 is going to be our first substantive lesson about Christopher Columbus. Episode 1, or lesson 1, if you will, was about me. I told you a little bit about myself, who I am, why I'm knowledgeable in this area, and why you should believe the things I say. Lesson 2 was an interview with Matt Minsky, Esquire of the Bocchetto and Lentz law firm, talking about the lawsuit against the city of Philadelphia and the mayor. And you can hear both of those episodes archived at Radio Voice Italia's website. Today, however, we're finally going to get to some substantive material about Columbus himself. So I'm going to start the class by giving you a bit of homework. Now, of course, there are no grades in Christopher Columbus University. There are no tests. But if you really want to get the most out of these lessons, I urge you to do the homework that I'll assign to you. And so your first bit of homework is to read History of the Indies by Bartolome de las Casas. It was originally written in Spanish, in 15th century Spanish, and was 3 separate volumes. There is an abridged version translated into English by a woman named André M. Collard, C-O-L-L-A-R-D. Looks like Collard, but I think in French they pronounce it Collard. It's published by Harper and Row Publishers. It's 1 volume. It's all 3 of the books, Tomo Uno, Tomo Dos, and Tomo Tres, all bound together as one. The ISBN number, if that helps you, it used to be a 10-digit number. Now it's a 13-digit number. The 10-digit ISBN is 006-131-5400. That's 006-131-5400. And the new 13-digit ISBN number is completely different. It's 978-006-131-5404. That's 978-006-131-5404. Get your hands on a copy of that book and read it for yourself, so you don't have to just rely on me. And you can see for yourself that the primary historical sources absolutely demonstrate that none of the atrocities attributed to Christopher Columbus are true. He never committed any acts of racism, rape, maiming, murder, genocide, slavery. Those atrocities were committed, you will read, by the arch nemesis of Columbus, Francisco de Bobadilla. And so I was thinking that for my first substantive lesson about Christopher Columbus, I would maybe give you a character sketch of the man's life from beginning to end, so you knew the broad strokes of his life, and so that when I focus on different aspects of his life in subsequent lessons, you would already have that background in your head. But then I thought, there's something I really should even do before that, which is explain the reason why we should care about Christopher Columbus and the lies that are being levied against him. I think it's important that you care about the man. And so you may care already because of ethnic pride, let's say. He is from Genoa and you are an Italian American, and that may be enough, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's hardly the real reason why we should care. You may also care because you are a patriot, and you consider him an icon of Western culture, or perhaps even the greatest hero of the 15th and 16th centuries. And that's great too. But there's even a bigger story. Everyone who cares about people, who cares about fairness, who cares about civil rights, should care about Columbus because he was the first civil rights activist of the Americas. And you've heard me say that a number of times. And today I'm going to tell you why. The primary historical sources reveal that Columbus not only actively fought against Francisco de Bobadilla, the committer of the atrocities in the West Indies, and against the Spanish nobles seeking to commit these atrocities under Bobadilla, but for the following 12 reasons, he was the first civil rights activist of the Americas. Number 1, Christopher Columbus consistently and persistently advocated for granting the tribal peoples of the West Indies full rights and protections as Spanish citizens. That comes right out of the letter of Christopher Columbus dated February 15th, 1493, stating that the crown should give the tribal peoples of the Indies, quote, the love and service of their highnesses and of the whole Spanish nation, end quote. Did you hear that? the love and service of their highnesses and of the whole Spanish nation. Does that sound like a man who's committing genocide? He's counseling his superiors, his lieges, to show love and give service to the tribal peoples. You can find that letter in History of the Indies. It's Columbus's journal entry of October 14th, 1492, where he suggests that the tribal peoples be made subjects of the crown, which would grant them all of the rights attendant thereto. Number 2, Christopher Columbus sailed the Caribbean on his second voyage, rescuing Taínos from capture and enslavement by the flesh-eating Carib and Canib tribes, thus creating the first underground railroad of the Americas. Now, this can be found in the epistolary account of Columbus's second voyage, written by Dr. Diego Chanca. And it can also be found in Columbus's journal entries describing his second voyage, dated 1493 through 1496. He also, by the way, continued that underground railroad in the years following, when the Spanish nobles, they were called the hidalgos, began to rebel against Columbus and disobey him and force Taínos into servitude anyway against Columbus's orders. So every time he went back to Spain, he took some willing enslaved Taínos with him to be baptized. And here was the loophole. Because baptized people could not be enslaved in Christendom. So he outwitted the hidalgos by taking these Taínos willingly back to Spain, had them baptized willingly, and they were no longer enslaved peoples. So every time he went back to Spain, he did this. And that was the continuation of his Underground Railroad. Number 3, Christopher Columbus actively fought the violence of the imperialist expansion of the Crown of Spain, at times going as far as to interpose his body between the swords of conquistadors and resistant islanders. And this can be found in History of the Indies, Book 1, Chapter 92, recounting Columbus's freeing of the tribal people arrested and maimed by Alonso de Ojeda, saving their lives from Ojeda's bloodthirst. Read it for yourselves. Number 4, Christopher Columbus highly regarded the Taínos he found in the New World, characterizing them as intelligent, trustworthy, beautiful, and the makings of, quote, good Christians. These are his words, not mine. You can find these characterizations in Columbus's letter to the Crown of Spain in too many places for me to cite here. Number 5, Christopher Columbus promoted peace in accordance with the 10 Commandments and the scriptures he held in such reverence. He was a very devout Catholic. And you can see all of the entries in his diary recording his contact with the tribes, all of which, I'll repeat that, all of which were peaceful and friendly. The entries are too numerous to list here, but are corroborated in Book 1 of History of the Indies, and too many places for me to cite. Now, that's not to say that there weren't aggressive or antagonistic or violent conflicts between the tribes and the settlers, but whenever Columbus was involved, all contact was peaceful. Number 6, Christopher Columbus intervened always as a pacifying force against the greedy and entitled Spanish nobles who defied his prohibitions against enslaving the tribal peoples, revolted against Columbus's governance in response, and indulged in mutual hostilities with the tribal peoples against Columbus's direct mandates for peace. Christopher Columbus's influence as a pacifying force can be seen in books 1 and 2 of Historia de las Indias, all through. Number 7, Christopher Columbus maintained friendly, peaceful, mutually beneficial relationships with the tribal peoples of the Americas, the overwhelming majority of whom considered Columbus a good friend and a welcome newcomer. Read Book 1 of Historia de las Indias and read Columbus's journal entries recording the first contact with the various tribes during his first and second voyages. You'll see for yourself. Number 8, Christopher Columbus provided testimony to the court of Spain, resulting in the deposing of Francisco de Bobadilla, the real perpetrator of the atrocities in the West Indies. You can find that in Historia de las Indias, History of the Indies, Book 2, Chapter 3. Number 9, Christopher Columbus spent the latter half of his fourth and final voyage working to depose Bobadilla's successor, Nicolás Obando, who continued Bobadilla's atrocities in Columbus's absence. Columbus did this in defiance of the crown's mandate to not even visit Hispaniola and not to free any more slaves, because, as I said, he kept bringing them back to Spain to be baptized and emancipated, and then the crown didn't know what to do with these people. And they also told him not to even bother Ovando. You can find all of this in Book 2 of History of the Indies, Chapter 36, recounting how Governor Ovando prohibited Columbus from coming to Hispaniola, but Columbus showed up anyway to confront Ovando in his own court. Number 10, Christopher Columbus successfully petitioned the Crown of Spain to enact the first civil rights legislation of the Americas, forever securing an impregnable decree from the highest authority protecting the tribal peoples from enslavement or any other mistreatment. It read, and I quote, "All the peoples, the Indians of Hispaniola, are to be left free, not subject to servitude, unmolested and unharmed, and allowed to live like free vassals under law, just like any other vassal in the kingdom of Castile." Did you hear that? All the Indians of Hispaniola are to be left free, not subject to servitude, unmolested, unharmed, and allowed to live like free vassals under law, just like any other vassal in the kingdom of Castile. Now, you may quibble over the term vassal, but everyone in the feudal paradigm is a vassal. Even a king is a vassal to a high king. A prince is a vassal to a king. So what he's saying here is that they should be treated like citizens of Spain and have all of the rights that are attributable to that position. And Christopher Columbus got that passed. He was the one who drafted that particular language, and the king adopted it wholesale into the decree. Number 11, Christopher Columbus inspired Friar Bartolome de las Casas. You may recognize that name as the author of History of the Indies, but he was also deemed by the crown and the church to be protector of the Indians. He inspired Friar Bartolome de las Casas to petition the crown of Spain successfully to fund the formation of an order of Dominican friars who stationed themselves in the West Indies and enforced the civil rights legislation that Columbus got passed, forcing the Spanish nobles to end their mistreatment and slavery of the tribal peoples once and for all. Yes, that's right. You heard me correctly. Thanks to Christopher Columbus and Friar Bartolome de las Casas, the mistreatment of the Indians, or the tribal peoples, if you prefer, of the West Indies, came to an end, actually came to an end. And a lot of people go, oh yeah, but then they started enslaving the Africans. Yeah, that didn't happen until 10 years after Christopher Columbus was dead, okay? So you can't blame that on Christopher Columbus. But you can find what I just told you in History of the Indies, Book 3, chapters 130 through 139. And last but not least, number 12, Christopher Columbus initiated more than 500 years of cultural, economic, and political relations between the old world and the new, commencing a perpetual exchange of science, technology, law, commerce, art, music, literature, and most of all, people, benefiting and enriching the globe from pole to pole. You can find that all throughout Historia de las Indias, History of the Indies, all throughout the journals and logbooks of Columbus, and all throughout The Life of the Admiral by Hernando Colon. Now, you may say to yourself, wait a minute, that number 12 there, that's a bit of a stretch. Is that really an act of civil rights activism? It's not a stretch at all. Yes, it is. As an attorney, I point you to the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, which authorizes Congress to, quote, regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes, end quote. The Commerce Clause has traditionally been interpreted as a grant of positive authority to Congress, thus serving as the legal foundation of much of the government's regulatory power, but it is also an implied prohibition of state laws and regulations that interfere with or discriminate against interstate commerce, what we in the business call the dormant, thus protecting the rights of individuals to free commerce. So that's what Columbus did. That's item number 12. So yes, that is some civil rights activism on Columbus's part. Now, the false narrative to the contrary, relied upon in error by Columbus detractors, was first published by Francisco de Bobadilla, whom I mentioned in item 8 above, in an attempt, which unfortunately proved successful, to unseat Columbus from and usurp from him the office of governor of the West Indies. But Columbus categorically defeated all of Bobadilla's libelous claims in a court of law with the same evidence and testimony that resulted in the subsequent unseating of Bobadilla from the viceroyalty of the West Indies that Bobadilla had usurped. Now, Columbus didn't want to go back to governing those recalcitrant hidalgos, but he at least did defeat that slander. Bobadilla's libel was relegated to the trash bin of history for 500 years until self-proclaimed Marxist, self-proclaimed anarchist, and pseudo-historian Howard Zinn resurrected Bobadilla's debunked writings, relying on them as newly discovered data for the first chapter of his polemic, The People's History of the United States, which, by the way, cites no sources and will debunk Howard Zinn's chapter on Columbus in future lessons. Don't worry. The primary sources, however, including Historia de las Indias, History of the Indies, written by the mouthpiece of the tribal peoples, Friar Bartolome de las Casas, contemporaneously with the settlement of the West Indies, and in his capacity as the official protector of the Indians, prove Bobadilla's and Zinn's writings to be false. Now, the perpetration of these lies in the 21st century, particularly in the form of government policy, educational policy, despite what we now understand from the primary historical sources, constitutes not only a master stroke of ignorance, not only a regression into the divisiveness and ethnic sectarianism from which Western culture has far evolved, also a failure to govern and educate morally and democratically, placing such perpetrators among the liars, villains, and misanthropists of history. Now, I have a word to you liars out there in government and in the educational systems. This radio program is global. And when it's finished, however long from now that may be, I'm going to see to it that it is cataloged in the Library of Congress. That means as long as the United States of America stands, this radio program will exist. And every time one of you liars in the government, in the news media, in education, tells lies about Christopher Columbus in print or on video, I am going to read your lies on this program, expose you as the liar you are, and destroy your lies with factual historical record. So that's a promise that you can take to the bank. And so unless you're prepared to personally destroy the entire United States permanently, prepare for your lies to be destroyed permanently. Tell your friends. Well, that got dark pretty fast, but it had to be said because the world falls apart when you don't tell the truth. And the truth is that Christopher Columbus was the greatest hero of the 15th and 16th centuries and the first civil rights activist of the Americas. And that's today's class.